Okay, shall we get started? Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Rita Kakis, and I want to thank you for spending your evening with us. I do hope that you and your families are staying healthy and safe. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I did practice this. Okay, play from the start. Okay, welcome. Our annual event, Istorya-DC, is taken from the Filipino word which means story. For the past 5 years, we have shared the stories of DC Filipinos at our annual October event, which is Filipino American Heritage Month, and it's also Archives Month. But beginning in May, due to the coronavirus pandemic, Istorya-DC became a monthly series called Istorya-DC Online. Thank you to our regular sponsors, Centro Rizal DC, the U.S. Philippine Society, and POP DC. I especially want to thank our guest sponsors for this evening's event, the Philippine Arts, Letters, and Media Council, also known as PALM. Over 25 years ago, I met Linda Yangas, who's actually here with us today, and that's why, Linda, I changed your name, your panel, so people can see who you are. I met Linda at the Bethesda Y, where we were taking Tai Chi classes together. I was so thrilled to meet another Filipina, and she invited me to come to one of the Palm Kapihans at her house. It really was my first exposure to Filipino literature and arts, and the timing was great because I was also taking a strong interest in my family's Filipino and Washington, D.C. histories. Here's a picture of a Palm gathering with Noree and David Briscoe. I'm not in the picture, but at their events, I was the young Filipino kid who didn't speak Tagalog or cook Filipino food, but my Palm friends continued to welcome me to their events, including art shows and workshops, and they've supported my endeavors for almost 3 decades. From my 1993 documentary grant project about the DC Filipino pioneers, to my book, Filipinos in DC, that I co-authored with Juanita Tamayo-Lot, who's also here, who is also a PALM member, to the creation of my foundation that helps to preserve DC Filipino history. And folks like Linda Yangas and the Melagritos have been among my biggest friends, supporters, and advisors to the foundation. For this support and friendship, I'm ever grateful to the PALM community. Most notably, PALM was one of our co-sponsors in acquiring the literary landmark plaque, recognizing the old Manila House in DC that was located near Washington Circle. This was a community gathering place for Filipinos from the 1930s to the 1950s. Here's a picture of friends posing for a picture in front of the Manila House in 1945. And in the other picture, you see Nila Toribio Straka, whose grandmother actually ran Manila House, and so she's holding up the plaque before we had it installed. And you'll see that the facade of the building is still the same as it was in 1945. But cleaned up a bit. They did a lot of renovations. Filipino author Bienvenido Santos lived at and wrote about the Manila House in his collection of short stories, The Scent of Apples, which won the 1981 American Book Award. You will learn more about Manong Ben, as he was affectionately called, by Noree Briscoe, who's author of Ben on Ben, Conversations with Bienvenido Santos, written in 2011. Noree is a retired journalist, writer, and editor based in Hawaii. She and her family lived here in the DC area and was first president of PALM. Please bear with me for 30 more seconds. This event is being recorded. Feel free to turn off your video if you don't want to be seen. Questions will be answered at the end of Noree's talk, but please send your questions in the chat box located at the bottom of the screen. John Malagrito will moderate the question and answer session. So basically you type in the word stack plus your name, then type your question in the box and then hit the enter key. Okay, now we will begin with the recorded greeting from Tomas Santos, the son of Ben Santos, who lives in Colorado. Okay, Erwin, I'm going to turn off my presentation and stop sharing.
My thanks to Aaron Johnson for his hard work organizing these Istorya sessions. Thanks also to the event sponsors, the Rita M. Cacas Foundation, the Palm Council, the Philippines on the Potomac Project, Central Rizal, Washington, D.C., and the U.S.-Philippines Society. I'm happy to introduce our featured speaker, Leonore Aureus Briscoe, otherwise known as Noree. I am Tomas Santos, the son of Bienvenido Santos. In 1996, the year my father died, Noree and David Briscoe held a memorial service for him here in Washington, D.C., which I attended. I was so impressed to see that Dad had many friends here. The Briscoes are close friends of my family. During his extended stays in D.C., my father stayed with the Briscoes in Burke, Virginia. He was ninong to their eldest daughter. Now I may be Ben Santos's biological son, but Noree Briscoe was his literary daughter. Noree has edited several volumes, including the 2-volume anthology Philippine Press Under Siege. In March 2011, I was privileged to attend the launching of her book, Ben on Ben, Conversations with Bienvenido Santos. She had timed its publication to coincide with what would have been my father's 100th birthday. Her book seeks to preserve something of the past and also to look to the future. This, I think, is her play on the word Istorya, preserving words and experiences that would otherwise be forgotten, and Istorya, as in, let us continue to tell our stories. Both Ben Santos and Noree were deeply committed to encouraging writers of all ages to write stories. They sponsored short story and poetry writing contests both here and in the Philippines. Noree even got me involved in judging one of these contests and got me to chip in for the prize money. In her writing, Noree Briscoe explored the multi-leveled tradition Bienvenido Santos lived in, a tradition both Filipino and American, as old as the generation of Filipino writers in English that began with Jose Garcia Villa, and as young as the generation of Erin Entrada Kelly and Malaka Garib. It is a tradition that begins with a common heritage, but disperses diasporic into the world. For a good part of her life, Noree, armed with tape recorder and a ring binder full of questions, has tracked Ben Santos's thoughts on the role of the writer in society, and in particular, of the Filipino writer in America. His thoughts about Filipino American literature are valuable because he was so much a part of its beginning, one of its pioneers. However, we would miss the point of Mang Ben, as he was sometimes affectionately called, if we did not acknowledge his heart. As he says to Noree in one of the interviews, if the heart is my subject, It is the heart of humanity I write about. The critic Eddie Alegre once wrote that Ben is all about, quote, the search for permanent warmth, the enduring passion. Please welcome Noree Briscoe.
Okay.
You can start talking.
So Papa's gonna unmute you. So I just.
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
So I should talk.
Uh-huh.
Aloha from Hawaii. I am Noree Briscoe, and I'm very honored to have no less than Bienvenido Santos's only son, Tom, to introduce me here tonight. And especially, I am deeply touched by his anointing me as the literary daughter of Ben. Tom, in his own right, has distinguished himself as a professor of English and a literary scholar and critic, now retired from the University of Northern Colorado. I also want to thank Erwin and Tichi and Rita and all the prime movers of the organizations sponsoring this event. Istorya is really, Ben would have been in his element in this venue because he loved stories, telling stories. His idea of heaven on earth is feeling the warmth of dear friends and kindred spirits gathered close together, sharing stories and remembering stories of friends, especially those who have passed on. So I want to say thank you again to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge and memories of a dear friend and mentor. Also, at this point, I would like to acknowledge the assistance of two very dear people close to my heart. Here on my right side is my husband of 50 years, David Briscoe, who was bureau chief of the Associated Press in Manila, and then our youngest daughter, here, Maya. Leonor Briscoe Terhune, who is our family resident expert on these highfalutin gadgets and technical hocus pocus. He was the one last night who set up the thing here so we could proceed with this unfamiliar format for me. Okay, so I want
But I have to operate it, so good luck.
Yeah. I should mention that we had to thank David for the videotapes of Ben that we're going to show in this presentation, because without David following Ben around with his video camera, we would not have this.
For which I was greatly criticized.
Okay. Anyway,
Okay.
you can see we've been married 50 years. Just back and
Okay,
forth.
so we're going to start now.
So we will start, and also first I want to say hello, mabuhay to all my old friends in DC, especially members and officers of the PAM Council. Okay, so first I want to just read a blurb. Short.
Okay, we're having a little trouble with the technical side here. We got to get back to the beginning.
There you go. Okay.
Okay. Now we're officially starting.
I just want to read a brief blurb I used for my book Ben on Ben, with Tom already mentioned in his intro. Bienvenido and Santos, through a wealth of books, stories, and poems published in the Philippines and captured the essence of Filipinos and Filipino Americans. His 15 published works of fiction and autobiography, his many honorary degrees and awards, both in the Philippines and the United States, put him among the most prolific and accomplished of Philippine writers in English. Okay, we're going to show a slide of the book covers of Ben's works.
And Noree is going to say about one sentence on each of these books.
Well, I hope so. In the span of over 50 years of writing. William Magdalena, his very first book. I would say those of you who are interested in stories of being clawed with passion and sex, this is the Ben Santos book you should read. Okay, John, remember that. And then the volcano is of course based on his life in Albay, where the Bayong volcano is. The Praying Man is Ben's only political novel. This was banned during martial law and was not published until 10 years later after martial law was lifted. The Man Who Thought He Looked Like Robert Taylor is a depiction of the Filipino living in the shadow of Hollywood. This was studied in Harvard University, where he gave a lecture about this book. And What the Hell For You Left Your Heart in San Francisco depicts his experiences as an exile, forced exile in San Francisco when martial law was declared in the Philippines, and
I just like to say, even if you don't read his books, you gotta love his titles, right?
Yes, he has really good titles.
Yeah.
Okay, and he has 5 short story collections. I put Dwell in the Wilderness at the top because these are the stories before he went to America, and I would urge people who would become so sophisticated here in the U.S. to read Dwell in the Wilderness. It's just beautiful stories about the Filipinos living in the countryside.
Okay, and you're going to talk about You Lovely People a little later, so we'll go to the next
You
one.
Lovely People, Brother, My Brother, these are out of print, and they have been reprinted by Bookmark. Yeah, this is a reprinted edition of
The Day the Dancers Came.
Yeah, and that Scent of Apples, I just like to mention, is the very first and only book of Ben Santos that's been published by an American publisher, the University of Washington Press. And following this publication, that's when Ben Santos started getting recognized in the United States. He won the 1981 American Book Award. Let's see what the
poetry.
The poetry books, The Wounded Stag and Distances in Time. And we will show Ben reciting some poems, videotape. So, the autobiographical works which he started writing in the last years of his life, memories, fictions, and then postscript to a saintly life, and then books of letters. He wrote volumes and volumes of letters to numerous friends all over the world, and America and the Philippines. And these are just
including you. There are like 80 pages of letters to Leonore. I still have
a lot of letters which I will eventually donate to the De La Salle University Ben Santos Creative Library and Creative Center. Okay, I just briefly look at the awards to show the awards that Ben got both in the Philippines and the United States. His literature straddles his adopted country and
he was both an American and a Filipino
he became
citizen.
a U.S. citizen long after martial law was declared, and he didn't want to have to go through the problems with the martial law government. Anyway, I want to digress a little bit here and talk about my friendship with Ben, because people always ask me, how do you know Ben so well? My friendship with Ben started in 1965 when I graduated from the University of the Philippines, and I went home to my hometown, Naga City, to help edit the newspaper that my father founded when I was 8 years old. And then 1965 was also the year that Ben returned to the Philippines and was installed Executive Vice President of the University of Nueva Cáceres. Then I would just like to mention that my first experience with Ben was not very good, because I tried to apply for a part-time teaching position at the university and he rejected me. He told me later that when he looked at my resume and he noted that he was 19 years old. And I said, 19? What can she teach at 19? And then, but the creature was really, he said, that I was the first beatnik that he met in Naga City.
Beatnik? You've never been a beatnik?
Yes. At that time, I just went around Naga in my sandals and dark glasses and borrowed clothes from my brothers. So I really was not, didn't look like a teacher at the university. So,
can I tell the last item about how we met?
Okay. And then,
okay, so we met in a class that Ben was teaching at the University of Nueva Cáceres in about 1968, 69, somewhere around there maybe.
No,
yeah.
69, you already
well, whatever.
left.
We've been arguing about dates for the last 3 days. But the interesting thing to me, Leonore had taken the class, and it was kind of her first introduction to Ben as a teacher. And then I was taking the class. I was a Peace Corps volunteer teaching at the University of Nueva Cáceres, even though I did not have a college degree myself, which was a little embarrassing to admit. Don't say that, yeah. And then we met in the class, and the thing that impressed me about Leonore is she was reading this book called Myra Breckenridge, which was kind of a raunchy novel by Gore Vidal. And that wasn't even part of the class, right? She would just read, she'd take the class and read it while Ben was talking about Madame Bovary. Okay.
Okay. Well, anyway,
now we're going to begin.
The negative experience
but the best part
being rejected
the best
by
part
Ben.
of our friendship. What?
Well, anyway, I just
sorry.
wanted to say
the slides are out of control.
We overcame that first negative experience because Ben's boss, the president of the university, said, "Ay naku, Ben, you have to wire that girl. She's the daughter of my good compadre." So that's how I got to teach at Ben's university at that time. Okay, so
now for some reason the video is jumped to my other screen.
You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah, but I can't. When I hit the,
this was also the time that Ben's first two novels came out. I mentioned that Villa Magdalena was a very sexual novel, and at the time when Ben liked to play tennis with the Archbishop of Nueva Cáceres, and he would go to the palace and have tennis games with the Archbishop. And I joked with him and said, "Ben, if the Archbishop had read your novel, Villa Magdalena, I don't think he would be welcome at the palace. It's full of sex." So anyway, that's just a side story.
Now we start with Ben
time.
in Washington,
Okay,
D.C.
now back to my assigned topic. I'm supposed to talk about Ben Santos in Washington, D.C. And I have divided it in two parts. Part one is when he was in Washington, D.C. during the war, when war broke out he was there from 1942 to 1945. Part two I will discuss was 47 years later when he came back in 1987. Okay, so I will talk about that later. In the part one, I just want to mention that he was a government pensionado. If you are not familiar with what government pensionados were, these were the Filipinos, bright Filipinos who passed a competitive test and were sent to the United States to take advanced studies in their fields of endeavor. Then was sent to the University of Illinois to study English. And but when war broke out, he had to move to Washington, D.C. because and work with at the old embassy with Jose Garcia Villa and other writers. Then he was assistant to Carlos P. Romulo and doing public relations for the embassy. At that time, American boys were going off to fight the war in the Pacific. And so there was a big demand for information about the Philippines and Filipinos. So the embassy was asked to select a Filipino that they could send all over the United States to give lectures on the Philippines. And the embassy was really agog about who was going to be selected. And everybody thought Severino Montano, who was a tall, mestizo, very good looking, like a movie actor person.
He looked like Robert Taylor?
No, he didn't look like Robert. Would be the choice. And so everybody was flabbergasted when the choice came to, was Ben Santos, because he was short and brown and looked and had a beautiful smile on his face all the time. And so Severino Montano said, well, I am the ideal Filipino, and Ben is only the typical Filipino. In fact,
in one of the videos, he calls himself the ambassador of smiles for the embassy.
Okay. Also, Ben said that, in fact, during that time he was lecturing, there was a life-size photograph of him being hung on the wall, on the outside of Walgreens store, and said, Filipino boy. Yeah. Okay. Now, during this time, the one thing I want to emphasize is during this time, Ben sojourned in Washington, D.C. He told us, that he mentions the Filipinos gathered at the Manila House. That's where he met a lot of characters that have now been immortalized in his books, especially You Lovely People, and then later in Scent of Apples, the book Scent of Apples, which won him the not yet.
Oh, not yet?
Yeah.
You want to go back?
No,
Okay.
because I want to say the Filipinos stranded in Washington, D.C. at that time when Ben was there, many of them were, some of the pensionados and rich students who studied in American universities. I just want to mention the two characters in the Manila House, the story, Leroy and Leo. These are actually very prominent people in the Philippines. Leonidas Berata is the uncle of Secretary of Finance and Prime Minister Cesar Berata
Under Marcos.
Under Marcos. Yeah. And he's also related to the Sarao family that manufactured the jeepneys in the Philippines. And what do you call it? What's the other one? Leo is actually Leonidas Berata, who was an economist and prominently played a part in the organization of the Central Bank of the Philippines, and was later what do you call this? The later
thought-
chairman of the Development Bank of the Philippines. What I was going to say is that many of the people who were gathering there were, when they returned to the Philippines, especially those who had advanced studies in American universities, were hired on to very important positions in government and business, and they were important in the rebuilding of the country after the ruins of World War II.
Okay.
So that's it. That's what I just wanted to emphasize. Now, part two, Ben Santos in Washington, D.C. And the Palm Council plays a big part in this because in June 1987, we had my friend Jimmy Yambao, who is an English major like me in UP, except Jimmy was very prestigious because he was editor of the Philippine Collegian. Well, he was based in Washington, D.C. at the Philippine Embassy. And we kept talking about the need for having an association of book readers who would focus on promoting Philippine books and publications. And so we said, okay, let's have a Philippine Reading Association. This was just, and so we had a lunch meeting that we organized, hosted by Susan Castrense, who was Consul General then at the embassy, then Jimmy Yambao and Al Vicente, and then I came in. I think LV representing Tanghalang Filipino was there, Rita Adkins, Alice Tanoe, and this was the core group that started the Palm Council. At first we said PINRA, we saw Pasitan artists, we had Alice, we had TD, and journalists, and we said, well, it cannot be just book reading. And so we decided, okay, arts, letters for Ben Santos representing letters, and the press, and media, me, and so we said, okay, Palm Council, let's have it, Philippine Arts, Letters, and Media Council. And we designated Pasita to design the logo for the conference, and she really worked on it overnight. And then she came up to me and said, Noree, this is what I came up with, and it's like a palm. If you
fans, right? The fans.
Yeah, like the palms, and then that's how the palm can. Immediately we used the palm logo for the Palm Council, and then in 1988, I solicited funds from Ben Santos and Tom to help us sponsor the very first Philippine American short story contest in the US. I don't think that's ever been done again, because it's not easy to have a short story contest.
So it was basically done for 2 years, right? 89 and 91.
We basically had, I had enough money from Ben and Tom to fund the cash prizes for the 2 years, 1989 and 1991. And all the prize winnings, the first prize in the first year was $400. We put out $650 for the winning stories in 1989. And then these prize winning stories we collected into a book with and Anita Mirina helped me as co-editor, and I used to go to Anita's place in Tacoma, Maryland, and we used to work on the short stories, editing and putting it together. And we used Pasita's, the cover design is painting is from Pasita's painting of how Mali lost her accent, and the cover design was actually put together by John Medigrito. And that came out in 1997, a year after Ben died. Okay. The other things, and I just want to mention just some of the highlights of the activities we did in the PAM Council when I was at the helm. And when we were starting, we had exhibits at the at the Martin Luther King Library, because I made friends with the librarian there, and she agreed to have the Philippine festival events that the PAM Council sponsored there at the Martin Luther King Library. And we had Pasita's early trapuntos. There were photos by Filipinos by Paul Taniedo, and collection of Philippine fabrics, costumes, and handicrafts. And the ambassador, Emmanuel Pelaez, was kind enough to grace us with his presence by cutting the ribbon. We also launched the 5th book of Ben Santos, the San Francisco novel, and Ben gave a lecture on immigration blues. And among the other things we were doing was the Philippine Festival Parade, which I worked to initiate in Washington, because I used to work at the National Press Building, and I would go to the Freedom Plaza by the Marriott Hotel and by lunch there, and I said, what a beautiful setting for a Filipiniana Fair and a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. So I brought the idea to the Philippine community meeting, and in that group, you suggested, you own it. So I was the one saddled with all the work to get the first Philippine parade on Pennsylvania Avenue started. And of course, Pasita especially, with her red Miata, Mazda Miata. She is so full of energy and art. I could not have done many of the things we started during the time without Pasita. I just dearly miss that friend. And so, and among the other things that the PAM sponsored at the time were, we invited Doreen Fernandez, cultural historian, and Eddie Alegre, who is, and then, and we had one of the most debated arguments during that lecture of Doreen and Eddie was on the topic, what is right and what is wrong with the Filipino. And then we invited Amando de Ranilla, who is editor of the Manila. Amando de Ranilla, who is editor.
Why don't you talk about the video a little?
Okay.
That's been
then
flirting with people.
Okay. Usually his element, flirting with women, his women admirers. Well, anyway, we were. I went to the DC committee to promote Washington, and invited the head to come to a meeting of the community leaders, and he was quite impressed with the planning and all that. So he agreed to put Philippine Festival on the list of festivals in Washington, D.C. and gave us $2,500 for 19 to 1989 parade, and then the 1990 another $2,500 for 1990. And that's no small thing, because the other festivals in DC were the Cherry Festival, and the Folk Life Festival, what that's one of the the Philippine festival. This one, this in that list of festivals recognized by the DC Committee to Promote Washington. Anyway, we had
No.
that last video that David showed was the ati-atihan coming down from New York and New Jersey to participate. Oh, that's not the ati-atihan, but there's another picture. That's actually a band from the high school in Washington, D.C. But the ati-atihan came to participate in the Philippine parade, and we had the Reina Elena, the usual Reina Elena. What else was in the parade? And of course, the PAM Council was among the leading contingents with Pasita and Eva Claudio, and well, okay. Now, I'm being rushed on here. I have to go. I have to talk about the next part. Part 3 is working and spending time with Ben in Berg. So I mentioned that Ben was working on his San Francisco novel, which helped him work on and we started in Manila when he was there, and we were there for the AP. And then and when we moved to Berg, Virginia, David was with the Washington Bureau of the AP. So we moved to Virginia. This was in 1987. We were working on, I believe it was the 5th draft already of What the Hell For. You Left Your Heart in San Francisco. Ben always liked to say, I am more of a rewriter than a writer. He would write a first draft, set it aside, and then pick it up later and start a revision, a total revision. And then after that, he's still not satisfied. There's a tightening and tightening of the writing. So I think we went through until we have, I believe, the 8th revision when he was finally satisfied, and we sent it off to the Philippines for publishing by New Day Publishers. In staying with us, I just want to mention that Ben is a very early riser. He wakes up really early in the morning, like 4 or 5 in the morning. He starts off with his prayers to the Virgin of Antipolo, and then he always made his bed. He's a very neat, organized person. Takes a shower every day, and he's just like he was very quiet, and by the time the house woke up in the morning, he had already written something, written his.
You want to talk about his handwriting?
Yeah. Because he had suffered a massive heart attack in 1982, I think, and had problems with diabetes and other health issues. He could not write. He could not type anymore. So at that point, he was writing in this beautiful handwriting, very clean and neat. You see, this is a sample on the page.
This is a letter, but he also has whole manuscripts that were handwritten.
Manuscripts.
Okay, we have to move along, Noree.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're going to show a couple of videos of Ben reading.
Then he introduced the Sunday afternoon poetry
family
readings,
poetry reading.
Family poetry readings in our house, and this is a sample of Ben reading or reciting poetry during our Sunday afternoon readings.
Go back.
Okay. And this is
Pause it after it asks.
These mini poems are very, as they're called, are very little poems, so small that if you're listening, if you're not careful, I'll be through reading them already before you're able to adjust yourself. My poems are dying of old age. Yeah, I ask them, but they sit silent, shaking their heads, staring at their shoelaces loose in their eyes. That's one. You can write those. Another one. Counting scabs from a wound just healed is dreary, like counting other people's money. And who likes wounds? And then the third one. A piece of autumn's chill fell into my coffee, and I cried, "Waiter, take this away and give me spring."
another one.
This time is dedicated to my good friend Noree Briscoe. When I was yet a little.
Oops, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Start over.
This time is dedicated to my good friend Noree Briscoe. When I was yet a little boy, I could not rest without a toy. And whenever I could get one, I had to break it just for fun. I went to school where glasses thin and vases small were broken all. My fingers itched if I had none to break and smash, oh, just for fun. So on and on, all things I broke. But one day, suddenly I woke. With all my knowledge of the art, I could not break a woman's heart.
The eye roll.
So, okay. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons I've learned about working with Ben. You know, for somebody with his stature in literature, he had a habit of looking up words that he did not understand or whose meaning he was not clear about. So he always used a dictionary. We had to install our humongous Oxford dictionary in the dining room where we used to work. So that's something I learned from him. And then he was a prodigious letter writer, and he cultivated friends from everywhere, especially with other writers, and made connections with many people that have also nourished and nurtured his art. Among his friends, the Han Suyin, whom he met, was responsible for recommending Ben, I think, to be a writer in residence in Aspen, Colorado, or some place, I'm not sure. Doreen Fernandez, of course. Then Amy Lin, he met through my friend, the late Miriam Escalante Vermeeren, because when I was so busy with the parade, I asked Miriam, who's also a Bicolana, and remembers going to grade school with Tom for a year, was the guest lecturer at Harvard, and that's how Ben met her, and she invited and arranged for Ben to come to Harvard University and give a lecture on the Robert Taylor book. See, that's how Ben through his connections with so many friends that he made, that is a talent he had, was connecting with so many people, friends and other writers. And then keeping a journal and jotting down ideas and dialogues and characters. He always had a journal. And when he woke up, he said he would, that's one of the first things he did was write in his journal. And then in writing his fiction, his secret is always to start with a character. He said he's not big on themes and moral lessons. The character is always the most important to him, and it's very important that he would have this character, think about this character, and decide what miseries he was going to suffer through in the fiction that he's writing. Speaking of which, during the time after,
Okay, you're just going to talk a little bit about the unwritten novel.
Yes, during the time, because we always work very closely about the things, and in right after, during the time of the assassination of Ninoy Aquino, Ben was in Manila, and he said, this is the very first time that I am home in the Philippines during a big political upheaval in the country. And during the war, he was away in the United States, and he would, he's a big fan of Noree Aquino, and he always was watch the news and all that, and he said, I've got to write another novel about all these things happening in the Philippines. And so he thought, I have the what do you call that?
He wanted to write a novel about the events that were happening near the end of
because he
his
said
life.
it's such a shame. I have a ringside view of all this happening in the Philippines. And so when he was in Washington, D.C., and I was working with him, he said, Noree, you've got to help me. I have one more novel I want to do. And one time I had a book of poems by Pablo Neruda, and he saw so many different places. And he said, Noree, that's the title of the book, and I want you to collaborate with me on its writing. And I just read the last part of Memories Fictions, and there he mentions in collaboration with Noree Briscoe.
In fact,
he already mentioned that.
We visited LaSalle University, where they have a whole room that's dedicated to Ben de La Salle in Manila. And in the room, there's a display case that has a partial manuscript of this So Many Different Places novel, which has not been written. So this is one of the challenges of our later years.
Okay, then anyway, I just was going over my papers, and I found a draft, a first draft that I have typed out for him. And it begins with the character June, the main character June. He loved June because he met a Boy Noriega's friend, his name is June. Anyway.
We're running out of time.
And it's about Naga City.
Yeah.
And that is the locale of the novel that I'm supposed to be in collaboration with Ben. Naga City.
Okay,
anyway,
so we're going to move on.
In 1993, PAM hosted a community pahatid.
At the new embassy.
At the new embassy building. Farewell to Ben, who was going back to the Philippines. Anyway, this was actually the first reception held in the Carlos P. Romulo Hall of the Philippine Embassy. And there's Ambassador Robbie. If you look at the video that David is showing, that's Anita Marina with Ben.
It's you with Ben.
I thought I wouldn't return to this company anymore when I left last time, because it gets to be so lonely here when you're old, you know. When I was young, Loneliness was no problem. But when you're old and you can hardly walk, I begin to realize that I've always known, of course, that I can live without people helping me. But I'm so glad because you're here, maybe thinking that you should have read my books because you have not. But don't worry, your name is Legion, you see. If all of those who want to read my books, I'll not be a poor man. The book that Noree has is my autobiography. It's the story of my life. You can believe it. At 82, I thought that I've been writing fiction. Why don't I tell the truth for a change? It's really hard to write an autobiography. You feel exposed, as though you have removed your clothes in public and expose all your shortcomings. Okay, that's a joke. Bakit kaya gawin gusto
nagtatampo ang ligaya at laging may luha ang mata. Ibon ang aking katulad na di na makalipad dahil sa hirap at pagod sa paghanap ng kanyang tulad. Kung batid mo lang ang tunay kong dinaramdam, buhat nang ako ay iwan mo aking
Sadly, Ben never returned back to Washington, D.C. He passed away in his forever home in the foothills of Mayon volcano in Sagpon, Daraga, Albay on January 6, 1906. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Turn it over to John.
And I want to turn it over to John for any questions and comments. I appreciate your staying on with me, even if you're in your... Okay.
Well, thank you, Rita, Erwin, and Tixie, and Istorya-DC for organizing this spam reunion and reconnecting old friends who have forged a strong bond over the years. Thank you very much, Noree and David, for your mesmerizing close-up and personal portrait of Ben Santos, someone I can relate to because I'm also short, brown, and have a cute smile.
That's true.
I can tell from your presentation that 50 years of marital bliss has served you well. I understand one of you is hard of hearing, which is actually one of the secrets of a happy marriage.
Not me.
I also note that you have mastered the art of gently interrupting each other and muting and unmuting each other while on Zoom. I'm sure after listening to Noree's presentation, everyone in this webinar will search their libraries for copies of Ben Santos' books. I, for one, will reread Villa Magdalena and renew my acquaintance with the troubadour of the burning flesh. Noree knows me too well that I'm most interested in stories of passion and sex. All right, I actually have lots of questions for Noree because we're partners in crime, but I know that you also have lots of questions. So I will start with your questions first so that you will have an opportunity to engage Noree and be transported back to those days to come. So I think Linda is dying to ask her question. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, okay. Noree, thank you very much for sharing your memories of Ben with us. I still remember our pahatid. And in fact, he gave me a copy of one of his books, and he said, thank you for the pahatid. And sadly, he didn't come back. But anyway, thanks for sharing your memories. What I'd like, because I came to know Ben through Palm, and you had a very charming little story in that book of short stories that was published, Palm's book of short stories, and you had a foreword in that which talks about how Ben helped in launching that short story writing contest. Could you share with us again, share with the audience again, Noree, the charming little story of how you got Ben to contribute to that, to the cause of launching that book?
I had that in my introduction.
Yes, could you share, please share it, because I don't know if everybody knew about that, and I thought that was very charming.
The forward.
It's a foreword.
You don't remember?
The foreword of the Philippine
Okay. Yeah.
book.
Sometime in the winter of 1988, I placed a long-distance call from Washington, D.C. to writer Bienvenido Santos in Manila. In my long years of friendship and association with Ben, I often heard him express a keen desire to see some more young and talented Filipinos writing stories about their lives. He felt this need more acutely as old age and bouts of illness continued to slow him down. Sensing his imminent mortality drawing near, he eagerly sought out the company of young people. He looked into their smooth, unwrinkled faces and wondered, would any one of them suffer the same disease that afflicted him and others like him who live by the power of the word? Nothing gave Ben as much hope and joy as the thought of younger generations of Filipinos and Filipino Americans picking up the pen after he was gone and writing their hearts out the way he wrote his heart out in his lifetime. And so when I called Ben to wish him a Merry Christmas in December of 1988, this was what I had in mind, a dream, the passing of the torch from the old to the young, from one generation to another, from the old country to the new. Ben sounded muffled on the phone, hardly audible when he came on the phone. Roused from sleep in the still dim light of early morning in Manila, he was not yet totally awake. His faint hello seemed very far away. Without much preamble, I went to the point. How would he like to help young writers? What do you mean? He asked. I told him he needed some help in launching the first nationwide Philippine American short story contest in the United States. I gave a brief spiel. The contest would be open to Filipinos or Americans of Filipino ancestry, and entries must have themes that relate to the lives of Filipinos in America. The main goal was to recognize the talents of younger writers and encourage them to continue writing fiction. To achieve this goal, the Philippine Arts, Letters, and Media Council would give out cash awards for the best stories. Then, as funds permitted, the prize-winning stories would be collected in an anthology. How much do you want? Ben asked. I was taken aback because I knew Ben to be extremely careful with his money. He was a generous soul, but he wasn't given to spontaneous displays of charity. So I didn't expect him to capitulate so easily. Quickly, I made a mental calculation of prize monies, at least for the first 2 years of the contest. 1,000, I suggested hesitantly. Okay, he said without hesitation. The deal was struck just like that, swiftly and without fanfare or sweat. I started to gush, but Ben stopped me. You're lucky I'm not wide awake yet. he said. I might think differently when I get out of my pajamas. Since some 2 weeks later, after the new year, a check for 1,000 came from the mail. And I thought I was, then Ben said, I thought I was dreaming when you called. Ben wrote, now I'm wide awake. It's good to dream when you're wide awake. You have all my best wishes. And then I recall this because then he died, and the Palm Council was able to collect the stories, and this is.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda, for reminding me.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much, Noree. I have more questions, but let the others ask them.
And your answers
Hey.
have to be shorter.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Linda, for that question with a long answer. Now I'm going to turn over to Rodney. Rodney actually has a lot of questions, but let me start with this one because I think it's very relevant. In your conversations with Ben Santos, did he talk about his writing approach? How did he develop his stories? Noree?
She talked about a little bit of it already.
well, like I said, always had characters. That's why he met all these Filipinos in Manila House. How could he not help writing the stories of the people he met? There were all kinds of characters, and many of them hurting and finding a way for loved ones in the war still raging in the Philippines. Even as a young boy, when he was in the slums of Tondo in Manila, how could he not be a writer? Because it was dying and death all around him, people coughing out their lives in tuberculosis. That's why Dwell in the Wilderness is so powerful to me, because these are some of the stories right out of the milieu of the slums where he grew up. And you said the writing style, like I said, he would write a first draft. He started with character. Character is the most important to him. And the character should be people who start with people who are good people and then mess up their lives. You can't write fiction and have all things, all happy things happening to them. That's not the kind of fiction he's talking about. You have to mess up the lives of your characters, but you have to know them very well from inside, especially in the soul and in the heart, and write about something that about their human condition. This is pain, pain, pain. That's what he always emphasized. Okay, I hope that's short enough. That I hope that answers your question. I have, if you're interested in more, read Ben on Ben, which is Ben himself talking about his works and his writing. And these are all from conversations that I take with him. And in his last year, I think 1993, the last year he was there, I presented him with all the transcripts that I had prepared, and he went over them again. He said about his works, about his books, and when he was satisfied with the corrections he had notated on the sides or on the margins of the transcripts, he signed off. He said approved, and then he signed off Ben Santos. So if you're interested in his writing, it's all there in my book. So of course I'm promoting my book, Ben on Ben. But that's where it's all captured there in the tape conversations that I collected in that book. So
Noree, Juanita wants to know if there is any initiative to reprint Ben's works.
She wants to know if there's any initiative to reprint the works. I think some of the reprints are still in print, right?
Yeah,
if you go on Amazon, you can find some of them.
I had to help him as his literary agent, and I worked very closely with Gloria Rodriguez, whose picture appears in that poster. And she is a great believer in Ben, and so she was responsible for many of the reprints, Villa Magdalena and the Volcano. These are all reprints because all his other works are out of print. The only
Well, somebody, I went on Amazon and somebody was selling one of these for $100.
Oh
So
my
I guess it's
gosh.
out of print. Even the reprint is out
You
of
know,
print.
and I would like to mention it to
Yes.
the PAM. If anybody who goes back to the Philippines, if you can track down Gloria Rodriguez and happen, because we never had any accounting of the sales from the book. I think the copyright is yeah, the copyright belongs to the PAM Council. So anybody in the PAM who goes to Manila, please track down
Okay.
and see how much money is. You might have some funds awaiting you from the sale, because I think,
Pesos.
oh, in
You can do
pesos,
one.
yeah, of course, but you don't sneeze at pesos just because they're pesos. But anyway, yeah, these are this is probably considered antiques now, the books of them, because they've been long
Out of print.
out of print.
I could follow up on that because, like,
Well-
you know, Carlos,
I'll
you
tell
know,
you.
Carlos Bulasan's book has been reprinted by the University of Washington Press. I'm wondering if
It was actually the University of Washington Press that printed Scent of Apples. I don't know if that's out of print or not.
I have no idea. I think they had two second printing, but
Yeah,
I
let me
wouldn't
see.
know. I don't know anybody there. When Ben was living, he had me write to the director there, and I don't know. Ben said that there were attempts to
In Scent of Apples, it says it had a fourth printing in 1994.
Oh, that's long.
Fourth printing,
Yeah.
so I don't know if it's had any since then.
Well, Ben said that there were what do you call that? I'm losing my words. There were attempts to print some of his works, like I think the Volcano. Some publishers American publishers were interested, and he said the discussions never came to anything because they wanted to change a lot of things. And he said, these are novels. The stories are very close to my heart, and these are essentially Filipino stories. And I think the publishers wanted to Americanize it so that it would be more open to the American readers, and he refused. So he said, so Scent of Apples is the only work of his that's been put out by an American publisher.
So there were three of these. There was
this one,
Brother, My Brother, You Lovely People, and The Day the Dancers Came were printed in this format in 1991. I think they were printed in the Philippines, right?
Yeah, by Benipayo Press.
Yeah.
I think I worked on this too. I had to help Ben with some of the just the typo errors, to make sure that they would not be repeated in the reprint edition.
Okay, I'm going to call on Mency. Mency actually had a question earlier about the writing discipline. Is that your same question, Mency?
No.
Go ahead. Ask your question.
Yes. So no, just a comment that when I went to the Philippines in 2019, I was able to get copies of The Day the Dancers Came, You Lovely People, and Brother, My Brother from the Philippine bookstore, and these ones were printed by Bookmark.
Oh, Bookmark, yes.
Yeah.
Bookmark, yes. I think the original were Benipayo Press, but these are Bookmark. It's another friend of Ben's.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and my other question was, are the Palm book, is that, where can we get copies of that?
The what?
The
The
poem
Ben and
book,
Ben book.
the short story book. don't
Like I
know.
said, if somebody goes back to the Philippines,
Oh, okay.
check and track down Gloria Rodriguez if she's still
That's
around.
New Day Publishers, right?
No, it was Gloria, because published by Giraffe Books, which was founded by Gloria and her daughter, I think. But I don't know. I really don't know. I think I only have 1 or 2 copies.
You have 2
myself. I had just 2 copies, and that's all the copies I have.
I have an extra copy and I will sell it to the highest bidder.
It's
good.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, doing yes, because you have to read through manuscripts and all that. Help Ben was a judge for the 1991 National Endowment for the Arts fiction writing contest in the United States. He was one of the judges, together with the Chicana author Sandra Cisneros, and the judging is not very easy, because you have to judge novels too. We had big stacks of manuscripts, and I helped him. We read through, and then we winnowed the piles and had a first pile of negligible, which could be eliminated, and then we had a pile of promising, which he went over and discussed, and then he went to join his fellow judges at the National Endowment offices, and they discussed, and he said he just let them, with their selections. The judges said each of their selections, and they discussed and they argued the merits of their selections, and then said, I was just so tired of arguing over which one, and so he just let them make the final decisions about the winning entries.
Can I just add a little footnote?
Okay.
A personal note.
And there are other people that have questions.
Yeah. Thank you. My first encounter with Ben Santos was actually when I was in the Peace Corps in Paracali in Camarines Norte, and I was teaching high school English. And one of the stories that I taught was the day the dancers came. And that's the first that I'd ever heard of Bienvenido Santos. And then it was 3 years later when I met him with Noree.
Okay, Nancy also wanted to ask about Ben's writing discipline. You mentioned earlier that he would get up early in the morning and he would start writing with his handwritten penmanship. So can you talk more about his writing discipline, Noree?
His writing discipline. Talk a little more about his writing discipline.
Oh, he's very disciplined. Like I said, he would wake up really early in the morning, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock.
How much would he write per day?
It depends. It doesn't, and then when I woke up, he would turn over the handwritten, and then I would type it out in my computer.
Well, you were typing out you were transcribing the
I was
handwriting.
transcribing his handwriting.
So you were more of a clerk.
No, but I also helped with the editing, and we would discuss. And one time he cried because I was not too happy at the beginning with the first drafts of the San Francisco.
She's a very tough editor. I hate having her rewrite edit my stories.
But just recently, I read his Immigration Blues in Scent of Apples and Robert Taylor novel. And I could see the editing process that Ben was going through, the tightening of the sentence. I learned from Ben. You eliminate a lot of unnecessary words, and yet because he was a poet, like I said, I found an old manuscript of the so many different places of the last novel he wanted to write. It's about Naga City. It starts with Naga City, with June in Naga City. He had already incorporated the symbol of Naga and all and all that.
Maybe you should try to make a short story out of that.
I have to check, and I could feel it's a beautiful rhythm. You can feel the rhythm of his language, and even that the drop of so many different places. As I said, he was a poet.
So next year is the 35th anniversary of People Power, right? It was 86.
Yeah, do the math, David.
35th. Yeah, so you could write a short, since it involves that period. Maybe you can release a short story by Ben Santos.
It's not easy. Oh, one of the things he always tells in his classes when he was teaching, right? Don't ever read, great works of literature before you sit down to write. You will end up not writing anything because you'll be stymied and intimidated. He said his technique is always to read some lousy, pocket book, a cheap pocket book.
Yeah.
And he would read and say, I can do better than this. And so then he would be able to write. He would have the what they call them. He would have the arrogance to be able to write but if you read what do you call
Dostoevsky,
or his favorite writers actually were the Russian writers,
Those Russians.
But if you read Dostoevsky and all these famous authors, I said you'll never write.
So I noticed Marquez and Chris Yabes are listening now. So you can
hi.
say hello.
Hello, Chris and Marites.
And anybody else from the Philippines.
And anybody else who still remember us, who are now old fogies, wondering about in the pandemic. We've been on lockdown since March.
Well, before we end this conversation, I just want to point out that when Noree was talking about writing discipline, Noree actually started tambuli.
Ah, yes. That's another story.
And that's another forum. But when you talk about writing discipline, and Noree, I must thank you because you trained a lot of young Filipino Americans to be writers, to be good journalists. And you applied the same writing discipline that you learned from Ben. So we are grateful to you. And you mentioned Manila Mail, and actually you inspired Manila Mail's content, because of your commitment to community stories. So we thank you for the inspiration that you continue to provide to our community.
I miss those days. I miss those days, John. It was just wonderful doing that, but it's a lot of hard work. And that's why I encourage the community to support your community paper, the Manila Mail, because they are very important in documenting the milieu in which you live. And look, if I didn't have all these notes and David didn't have the video, we won't have anything. History is so important in capturing the essence of our lives. That tell our younger generation that we have lived. So I'm glad that, John, you're carrying on the journalism in Washington, D.C. And the PAM, I am so proud of all your work. You're still going strong and enjoying halo-halo at Linda Young's place.
Yeah.
I remember all the delicious food that we used to share at Pasita's house on 16th Street. Remember, we used to give directions. He says, it's the only house with the big, bright red door. And that's Pasita's house. And she used to serve roast turkey. We had a Halloween Istorya at Anita Marina's house, and we shared spookies. scary stories about aswangs and mananangals. Linda Yangas was leading the stories and duendes, and that was, it was so much fun. Even the Ambassador Pelaez, used to join us in those gatherings of the PAN Council at Pasinta's house. Then we had, I remember eating the most delicious pinakbet with bagoong at Eva Claudio's townhouse. Others, Anita
You remember
served
the
adobo.
food, in other words.
Of course, that's a Ben Santos. The Ben Santos thing is remembering the food that
Yeah,
you eat.
I know.
You know, the taste of food. He was
I learned that
also,
in the Philippines, how important food is.
yeah, it's so important.
5 meals a day.
And that's why Manila House was so important for as a gathering place, because they serve good Filipino food that the Filipinos miss while they were
So this is actually a good time to close. We're at the end of our program, mainly because I haven't eaten my dinner. So all this talk of food is making me very hungry. But don't leave yet. What I want to do is thank you, Noree, for a wonderful presentation. I know that you were nervous, but you were absolutely fabulous. And thank you, David, for helping us out, helping Noree move along with the program. You're wonderful.
It's okay.
So,
Aloha.
I want to take this time to invite all of you to the Istorya-DC Online next month. Please save the date, Thursday, October 22. It will also be on Zoom. And this event will focus on ways and tools that families can preserve their family records and their histories, being it's a Archives Month, and it's also Filipino American Heritage Month. The event will be held in partnership with the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, the NCCA, which is the official arts council of the Philippines, and also with the Philippine Embassy's Centro Rizal program. There's a Tagalog title, but I'm not going to butcher it, okay? Please stay tuned. We'll send more information in an email, and or also we'll provide details on our website and on social media. So thank you so much again, each and every one of you, for spending your time with us. And please stay safe, continue to stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night. I'm gonna do a quick picture.
Good job, Mommy and Papa.
So cute.
Great job, Noree. Thank you very much.
That was a entertaining David and Norris show.
It really
Thank you, David and Noree. Thank you, John.
Reunion.
We should have another show with David and Noree to talk about their love affair.
Yeah, we need a Palm Zoom too. How about it, Linda Yangas?
Linda, you're muted, Linda.
We need to unmute you, Linda. Hang on. Unmute.
Thank you, David and Noree.
Good job, Mommy.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Rita.
Okay.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Erwin, for organizing this.
Hi, Jeline, Maya, and is that Rocky in the behind you, Jeline?
Maya,
No.
good to see you.
No.
Hi.
And Nara.
Yes.
Hi, John.
Nobody wants to leave.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Rita. Great
Okay.
job.
Yeah. Bye, Nita Churchill.
Bye. Bye, Nancy.
Bye. Good night.
Okay, bye, Nancy.
Oh, hey, Rick. Hey, Rocky, how are you?
Okay, Noree wanted to say hello to Al Vicente.
Oh, Al Vicente. Where's Al Vicente?
Al is retired.
Is Al Vicente on the?
There's Nara and Sasha. Hi.
Hi. That was awesome. I learned a lot about you two.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye. We'll leave now.
Oh, Nara, there's a lot more that you don't know about your mom and dad.
I know. I'm realizing that.
I'm the source of a lot of juicy stories about them. So. let's have some coffee sometime.
Member ID. Okay. 947 something.
Okay, we're signing out now. Bye.
Okay.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll make sure
Thank you,
everybody.
Rita. Thank you.
Bye.